Why was a humble carpenter from a forgotten village executed as a supreme enemy of the greatest empire on earth? And why did the local religious authorities, who deeply despised their Roman occupiers, suddenly hand over one of their own people to be slaughtered by them? By the end of this journey, you will see the most famous trial in human history not as a simple religious myth, but as a desperate, bloody political chess match. You will witness the exact moment a reluctant Roman governor realized he was completely trapped, forced to execute a man he believed was entirely innocent. Thank you so much for tuning in today. How is everyone doing? I know your days are busy, and I am truly grateful that you chose to spend your time here with me. Today, we are going to take a journey deep into the shadows of history together. Let us travel back 2,000 years to a small, arid, and intensely volatile region of the Middle East. This was Judea. It was the ancestral homeland of the Jewish people. For centuries, they had been crushed under the iron fists of successive empires. The Babylonians, the Persians, and the Hellenistic kings had all taken their turns subjugating this land. After a brief and bloody struggle, the Jews had actually managed to win a fragile period of independence. But before they could truly taste the fruits of freedom, the shadow of the Roman eagle fell over Jerusalem. Rome did not immediately conquer Judea with overwhelming military force. Instead, they used a strategy of quiet intervention. They propped up loyal puppet kings, most notably the infamous Herod the Great. But by the time our story begins, the Roman strategy had violently shifted. The stakes could not have been higher. If the local leaders failed to maintain absolute order, Rome would crush Jerusalem into dust. If the people rebelled, thousands would be crucified. The survival of an entire ancient culture was balancing on a knife's edge. After the death of Herod the Great, the Romans intentionally split his kingdom among his 3 sons. When the eldest son proved to be completely incompetent, the Romans lost their patience. They deposed him, stripped away the illusion of independence, and outright annexed the territory. Judea was now a formal Roman province. It was occupied territory, but this was only the beginning of the nightmare. By the time a man named Jesus of Nazareth began preaching his ministry, the geopolitical map of the region was a fractured, complicated mess. Judea was divided into 3 distinct zones. There were 2 small client kingdoms still, ruled by the remaining sons of Herod the Great. And then there was the proper Roman province, which contained the holy city of Jerusalem itself. This division of power created a bureaucratic labyrinth. It was a legal minefield where one wrong step could lead to sudden death. And it was exactly into this minefield that Jesus decided to walk. As we all know, Jesus preached his final, most controversial sermons in Jerusalem. But the timing of his arrival is the first great mystery we must unravel. He arrived in the city just before Passover. This was one of the most sacred and massive Jewish holidays of the year. From a purely political standpoint, it was the absolute worst possible time to stir up trouble. But why did he choose this specific moment? We will hold on to that question for now, because the answer reveals the true nature of his mission. During Passover, the population of Jerusalem swelled to massive proportions. Hundreds of thousands of religious pilgrims traveled from across the Mediterranean world to be there. The narrow, dusty streets were packed with people. The air was thick with the smoke of sacrificial fires and the deafening noise of a dozen different languages. High above the crowds, looking down from the stone walls of the Antonia fortress, the local Roman garrison stood on high alert. The soldiers gripped their weapons, scanning the masses for any sign of unrest. Passover was a celebration of the Jewish liberation from slavery in Egypt. It was a holiday deeply rooted in the concept of freedom from oppression. You can easily imagine how nervous the Roman occupiers felt during a festival that celebrated the overthrow of a foreign empire. If you are finding this historical context fascinating, please consider hitting the like button to support the channel. It really gives me the strength to keep making these deep dive videos for you. Now, let us shift our gaze from the Roman soldiers down to the streets below. Jesus did not just quietly enter the city to observe the holiday. He made a spectacular, highly disruptive entrance. He went directly to the holiest site in the Jewish world, the Great Temple. When he arrived, he did something that shocked everyone. He violently kicked out the money changers and the merchants who had set up their businesses in the temple courtyard. He overturned their tables and disrupted the economic heart of the city. To understand the gravity of this action, you have to realize that the temple was not just a church. It was the central bank of Judea. It was the absolute core of the local economy. By attacking the money changers, Jesus was directly attacking the financial lifeblood of the local priestly elite. But however shocking this was, a much larger problem was lurking just beneath the surface. The followers of Jesus were beginning to make incredibly dangerous claims. They were openly calling him the divine messianic king of the Jews. They believed he was the prophesied leader who would finally liberate them from Roman rule. In the ancient world, words had immense power, and the word king was the most dangerous word of all. The local Jewish elite, led by the High Priest Caiaphas, watched this unfolding chaos with absolute horror. They had a fragile, delicate arrangement with the Roman. As long as the priests kept the population quiet and paid their taxes, the Romans allowed them to maintain their religious authority. The priests had everything to lose. If a popular uprising began, in the name of a new Messiah, the Romans would not hesitate to slaughter the elite along with the peasants. Caiaphas had to act, and he had to act immediately, before the Roman governor noticed the disturbance. Here is where the story takes a truly dark and calculating turn. As the historical texts tell us, the religious elite bribed one of Jesus's closest followers. For 30 pieces of silver, Judas Iscariot agreed to lead the temple guards to Jesus. The arrest had to happen in secret, away from the massive crowds of pilgrims who might start a riot to protect him. According to the accounts, Jesus knew this betrayal was coming and made absolutely no effort to resist or run away. In the quiet, pitch-black hours after the Last Supper, he was apprehended in a garden outside the city walls. He was bound and dragged into the custody of the Jewish elders. Imagine the tension in that room. It is the middle of the night. The high priest hastily convenes a makeshift court known as the Sanhedrin. They are desperate to find a legal reason to eliminate this threat before the sun comes up. They accuse Jesus of blasphemy. They also accuse him of plotting to physically destroy the Holy Temple. From a religious perspective, the charges seemed easy to justify. Claiming to be the divine Son of God was the ultimate blasphemy, unless, of course, it was actually true. And as for threatening the temple, everyone had seen him cause a riot there just days earlier. It was not a difficult narrative to sell. During this rushed midnight trial, Jesus remained almost entirely silent. He made no serious attempt to defend himself against the accusations. And so, before the first light of dawn broke over Jerusalem, the religious court found him guilty. They sentenced him to death. They believed they had solved the problem. They believed the crisis was over. But let us pause for a moment. Put yourself in the shoes of the high priest. You have just condemned a popular leader to death in a secret night trial. What would you do next? How do you actually carry out the execution without sparking the very riot you are trying to prevent? If you have an idea, let me know in the comments. I always love reading your theories. The reality was that the Jewish elders suddenly faced a massive, insurmountable legal brick wall. Because Judea had been officially turned into a Roman province, the local Jewish courts had been stripped of their ultimate authority. They could arrest people. They could hold trials for religious crimes. but they no longer possessed the legal right to impose capital punishment. The right to execute a human being, known in Latin as the ius gladii, the right of the sword, belonged exclusively to Rome. It belonged to one specific man, the Roman governor of Judea, Pontius Pilate. If you are not yet subscribed to the channel, now is a great time to do so. Make sure to click the bell icon so you never miss out on these historical journeys. Please stick with me until the end, because the most crucial part of this entire trial is about to unfold. As fate would have it, Pontius Pilate was actually in Jerusalem at that exact moment. He did not want to be there. The Romans generally despised Jerusalem. It was hot, it was crowded, and the religious fanaticism of the locals confused and frustrated them. Pilate much preferred to live in the luxurious, Greek-style city of Caesarea Maritima, located on the beautiful Mediterranean coast. But duty called. During the volatile festival of Passover, the governor had to be present in the capital to personally oversee security. He was staying in a fortified palace, likely dreading every moment of the holiday. At the break of dawn, the Jewish elders marched their prisoner to Pilate's gates. They presented Jesus to the Roman governor and loudly demanded his execution. But Pilate was a pragmatic, cynical Roman bureaucrat. When he heard the charges of religious blasphemy, he was completely unimpressed. He argued that the Jewish religious laws had absolutely no weight in a Roman court of capital punishment. He was a Roman governor, enforcing Roman law. If they wanted this man dead, the man had to have committed a crime against the Roman Empire. Pilate essentially told them to take their religious dispute and deal with it themselves. But the Jewish elders were politically brilliant. They knew exactly how to force the governor's hand. They immediately changed their strategy. They stopped talking about blasphemy and religion. Instead, they brought up the political claims made by Jesus' followers. They told Pilate that this man was claiming to be the king of the Jews. This was the trap. This is the moment the entire history of the world pivots. Under Roman law, specifically the Lex Julia de maiestate, claiming a royal title without the fixed explicit permission of the Roman Senate was an act of high treason. It was a direct insult to the authority of the emperor, Tiberius. The elders argued that anyone who makes himself a king is speaking against Caesar. Pilate was suddenly backed into a dangerous corner. He could ignore religious debates, but he could absolutely not ignore a formal accusation of treason. If word reached Rome that Pilate had released a rebel king, Pilate himself would be executed for treason. Yet Pilate was incredibly crafty. He interviewed Jesus privately. He quickly realized that this quiet, philosophical man was not a military threat. Jesus had no army. He carried no weapons. He spoke in riddles about a kingdom not of this world. Pilate saw right through the motives of the local priests. He knew they were handing Jesus over out of pure envy and political self-preservation. Pilate desperately wanted to wash his hands of this entire situation. And then he found a brilliant legal loophole. During the interrogation, Pilate discovered that Jesus hailed from the town of Nazareth. Nazareth was not located in Judea proper. It was located in a northern region called Galilee. And if you remember the complex geopolitical map we discussed earlier, Galilee was not a Roman province. It was still ruled by one of the surviving sons of Herod the Great, a man named Herod Antipas. Because Jesus was a Galilean, Pilate instantly decreed that he lacked the proper legal jurisdiction. He announced that Jesus should be sent to his own local ruler for judgment. Pilate thought he had successfully passed the burden to someone else. Unfortunately for Jesus, Herod Antipas also happened to be visiting Jerusalem for the Passover festival. The guards promptly dragged Jesus through the chaotic streets once again, bringing him before Antipas in the early hours of the morning. Antipas was initially excited to meet this famous miracle worker. But Jesus refused to speak to him. He remained completely silent in the face of the king's questions. Antipas, however, was a seasoned political survivor. He had already executed another popular religious figure, John the Baptist, a few years earlier. That execution had caused massive social unrest and deeply damaged his reputation. Antipas wisely decided he wanted absolutely nothing to do with this new mess. He mocked Jesus, dressed him in an elegant robe as a cruel joke, and sent him right back to Pontius Pilate. The legal ping-pong game was over. Pilate's brilliant loophole had failed. The Roman governor now had no choice but to sit on the judgment seat and make a final decision. Once again, Jesus stood before the absolute power of Rome, and once again, he made no effort to defend his own life. Pilate tried one last desperate maneuver. He offered to release a prisoner as a traditional Passover gesture of goodwill. He offered the crowd a choice between Jesus and a violent, but the religious leaders had already stirred up the crowd. The mob demanded the release of the violent rebel and screamed for the crucifixion of the peaceful preacher. Pilate was trapped. The crowd was growing hostile. A riot was beginning to form right outside his palace doors. A riot during Passover was the one thing Pilate was strictly ordered to prevent. He looked at the silent man in front of him. He looked at the angry mob. And he made the ultimate cold, calculated political calculation. The life of one innocent peasant was a small price to pay to maintain the peace of the Roman Empire. Reluctantly, Pilate formally found Jesus guilty. But he did not find him guilty of blasphemy. He found him guilty of sedition against the Roman state. Much to the delight of the Jewish elders, the sentence was passed. As was the brutal Roman custom, Jesus was scourged and led away to be crucified. When the soldiers nailed him to the wooden beams, they placed a sign above his head. It listed his official crime. It did not say he was a blasphemer. It read, "Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews." He died not for a crime against heaven, but for a crime against the state. From the immediate perspective of the Jewish elites and Pontius Pilate himself, the crisis had been successfully resolved. Jerusalem survived the Passover festival without a massive, bloody revolt. The dangerous crowds eventually went home. The disciples of Jesus scattered into the wind in fear. The political machine had worked perfectly. Order had been maintained. But let us stop and ask ourselves some truly difficult questions. Was this decision really correct? Who actually benefited from this execution, and who was truly sacrificed? If Pilate had possessed the moral courage to release a man he knew was innocent, what would have happened to Jerusalem? We can look at this from multiple angles. From the perspective of Roman law, you could argue that Jesus was technically guilty. He allowed his followers to call him a king, and he did not explicitly deny the title when questioned by the governor. In an empire where the emperor's authority is absolute, any competing claim, even a spiritual one, is a threat to national security. But from a moral perspective, the trial was a masterpiece of corruption. It was a perfect demonstration of how powerful institutions will eagerly crush an individual to protect their own status quo. The real tragedy of this story is not just the physical suffering, it is the profound cynicism of the people in power. Caiaphas did not care about justice. He cared about protecting his fragile political arrangement with Rome. Pilate did not care about truth. He cared about preventing a riot that would ruin his career. Jesus was crushed between two massive, unfeeling political machines that simply found it more convenient for him to die. This brings us to a truth that echoes loudly in our own modern world. This story is not just a distant event locked away in ancient history. The psychological patterns we see in this trial are still operating all around us today. How often do we see large institutions, governments, or corporations sacrifice a convenient scapegoat to cover up their own systemic failures? How often do leaders prioritize the illusion order over the reality of justice, the bureaucratic passing of the buck, the manipulation of the legal system to eliminate a political nuisance, the whipping up of public outrage to force a desired outcome. These are not ancient tactics. They are the daily realities of human power dynamics. The technology has changed, but the human heart remains exactly the same. Earlier, I asked why Jesus chose Passover to make his move. The answer is that he likely understood exactly how this political machinery worked. He knew that by striking the temple during the most volatile week of the year, he was forcing the corrupt system to expose its true, violente nature. He forced the religious leaders to show that their ultimate loyalty was to Roman power, not to divine justice. He forced the Roman governor to show that his vaunted legal system was ultimately based on brute force and crowd control. By refusing to defend himself, he held up a mirror to the absolute moral bankruptcy of the authorities who condemned him. The narrative of guilt and innocence becomes entirely blurred. If Jesus was truly the divine Son of God, as his followers believed, then, by definition, he could not possibly blaspheme against himself. The religious charge was completely hollow. As for the Roman charge of sedition, Jesus explicitly stated that his kingdom was not of this world. It existed on a completely different plane of reality from the earthly borders of the Roman Empire. Depending on your philosophical point of view, his teachings were not an armed rebellion. They were a spiritual revolution. But the empire could not understand a power that did not rely on swords and shields. They judged him by the only metric they understood, and by that metric he had to be eliminated. What we can confidently say is that the political calculation made by Pilate and Caiaphas was a spectacular failure in the long run. They thought they were burying a minor political nuisance. Instead, they planted the seed of a movement that would eventually conquer the Roman Empire itself. Had Jesus not been found guilty in that dusty courtyard, had Pilate simply laughed off the charges and sent him home to Galilee, the entire trajectory of human history would be unimaginably different. The world, as we know it today, simply would not exist. The story of this trial is not over. It continues every time a person stands alone against the overwhelming weight of a corrupt system. It continues every time truth is sacrificed on the altar of political convenience. The question of whether he was guilty depends entirely on which laws you choose to believe in, the laws of men or something higher. If today's journey into the depths of history resonated with you, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It means the world to me. Next time, we will uncover another hidden truth that textbooks often leave behind. Until we meet again, keep questioning the world around you and take care of yourselves.